I'm going to let Wappn8r get to the guide he wrote here in a second, and I edited. I just want to let you know the videos are going to slow down for a bit. I know I just made a very bitchy video of me complaining about it, people commenting things on the channel. But literally just today, I got my dream job offer. So by June 20th, I need to have my house sold and be 200 miles south of where I live currently. So videos are going to slow down pretty drastically. I don't think we're going to shut it down for the season like I normally do, but we'll see. Just want to let you guys know if you don't see some coming out, it's because I'm just in the middle of awesomeness. So here's WAP.
Back in 2016, I remember no bigger hyped game than No Man's Sky, a space exploration survival game with 18 quintillion procedurally generated planets. Every video game journal, every subreddit was filled with hype for this game. It finally released in August to mixed reviews at best, missing several promised features, and it kinda sucked. But fortunately, this isn't an anecdote about lamenting the failure of a hyped game. It's about the brilliant rebirth of the phoenix that was No Man's Sky. After a couple of years passed, I started to hear murmurings of the studio fixing the game and continuing to put work into it. But by mid-2020 or so, people were actively praising it, and big streamers were playing it again on Twitch. It redeemed its poor start thanks to dedication of its dev team, which brings me to the FireDruid by Wappn8r. When I read the manual in my shiny new copy of Lord of Destruction back in mid-2001 while sitting in the car on the way home from the mall, where we just purchased it, I came across the druid and his ability to make volcanoes. You need to know my 5th grade yearbook stated that I wanted to be a geologist when I grew up. I was massively into rocks and minerals, Marie, and volcanoes were just fucking awesome to me. I hyped it up in my mind like No Man's Sky would be 15 years later, but when I finally got to play the class, the volcano kinda sucked. It had a very long cooldown and did meager damage, as did the rest of the fire skills. But would someone come to save the druid from the disappointment after all of that hype? In this case, we did have to wait a little longer, and it was a different group of guys that got it done, but the fire druid has risen from the ashes to be a fun, versatile, and effective caster, and most importantly to me, Volcano doesn't suck. Fire was always a great spec for leveling a druid through Mid-Nightmare thanks to Fissure doing so much damage until then, but always fell off in late game back in LOD because of the long cooldowns and the very small amount of physical damage each spell did, so most people ended up switching to Wind. It's refreshing to be able to finally actually take it to hell, as the long cooldowns have been reduced and the damage is now serviceable. Just be prepared for a lot of shit to be flying all over your screen. Fire Druid's a fun caster mix because you have A passive damage skill in Armageddon, B, trap-like effects including Volcano or Fissure, and C, a stand there and spam it spell, Molten Boulder or Firestorm. It makes it a fun caster to play in my mind because of these different types of spells. I'll mention now that there's a variant that prioritizes Firestorm and Fissure as their spam and trap spells instead of Boulder and Volcano. They play similarly except Firestorm has higher fire damage, but you have to choose between fully synergizing your physical spells or getting a high level Oak Sage. I prefer the Volcano Boulder version because I like that high level Oak Sage as well as generally liking hybrid damage. But if you're thinking about the Fissure Firestorm variant, swap Boulder with Firestorm and Volcano with Fissure for the remainder of the script because they really do play similarly. Firestorm is better paired with an Infinity, while here I have more of a hybrid physical Fire Pierce with my Amp Merc and my Phoenix Shield, so I'm going Volcano. Single target. Why do I get the feeling I'm going to end up saying a lot of similar stuff to Meteor here? Fire physical hybrid caster with a few cooldowns and all of the things that entails. Fortunately, there's enough difference in playstyle with the trap spells and passive damage on the druid that it doesn't feel repetitive. But for single target, you drop a Volcano under their feet and start spamming Molten Boulder. My typical rotation is 1 Volcano and 3 Molten Boulders and repeat. Is it optimal? Fuck if I know, but it works, unless you end up with a Stone Skin, Fire Enchanted, Magic Resistant enemy. Because there are those types of uniques every now and then, and you're built for AoE, and you can't control your Armageddon, I think we get about a 5 out of 10 here on single target. AoE. This is where that lot of shit flying all over the screen I mentioned earlier comes in. You're covering a massive chunk of the screen in fire and physical damage here, all while the Armageddon's giving you damage for free, especially if you're able to stick close to enemies. When there's big piles to kill, drop a couple Volcanoes in the middle and then start throwing Molten Boulders at priority targets. I really enjoy it for a walk through the jungle, but its damage heights just don't quite reach that of other characters. 8 out of 10 on AoE. Safety. One of the reasons I ended up loving Druid through the years I continued to play Lord of Destruction was the incredible safety with that 150% plus life Oak Sage and 2,000, 3,000 plus damage Cyclone armor. Yeah, it's been nerfed a bit, but you can still get a 600 life Oak Sage and have reasonable Cyclone armor, because it just scales on plus elemental skills now instead of synergizing with wind, which is another reason the FireDruid got fucked back in LOD, because its Cyclone armor was awful. You have all the range you could ever want with volcanoes, and Molten Boulders even push many enemies backwards if you need to control the room a bit. You get a little more damage from Armageddon if you're willing to go into the fray, but it's not a huge sacrifice if you hang back. I really like the FireDruid on safety, 8 out of 10. Ubers. You can bring a good Oak Sage for your team for Ubers, but your allies also might not like you throwing shit all over the screen when they need to see what's happening. Your abilities don't really hold the bosses in place. You have decent DPS and can deal with minions okay, but I'd rather just bring a summoner. 3 out of 10 on Ubers. Gearing ease. Here's where there's that corollary to Meteor again. It's a standard caster fire build that cares more about skills than FCR or Pierce because of the cooldowns and hybrid damage. You're only seeing 46 FCR breakpoint here. Higher does help for faster Molten Boulders, but since I tend to cast Volcano more anyway, I don't really feel like I need it. Fill out a rack of elemental skillers like normal, which are average priced among skillers. Add an Earthshaker and a Rhyme and you're into early game. You can get some GG gear, but Jalal's, Kuhagen's, Magefist, Lidless, and a 3 elemental Amy, and you're pushing level 40 on your skills, and that's plenty to start tearing through maps. Torjon here is kinda home field. Since half your damage is physical, bringing amp damage is a good idea and much cheaper than an Infinity in the early game with your physical variant. Yes, I'm using a Phoenix here, but you don't need that. Though I gotta say, I do love not having to worry about potions. That's one of the great things to me about leeching melee characters and why everyone loves mana and health per kill. 15 MPK and redemption here. I'll hardly use a potion this whole map. Overall on gear, pretty similar to Meteor. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. Playstyle ease. Keep Armageddon Cyclone Armor and your Oak Sage up. Cast a trap or spam spell and repeat. Your positioning hardly matters except a little bit with Molten Boulder, so it's pretty simple on the face of it for playstyle ease. You have just a couple spells to rotate through. The cooldowns are shorter than LOD, but they still exist, and a few of them are tied to your Gust cooldown, so you have to learn that interaction, which is especially important when leveling, while Gust only has a 6-second cooldown instead of getting down towards 1 or 2 seconds. It's Volcano and Fissure, by the way, that you can't cast while Gust is on cooldown. You also need to learn which enemies Molten Boulders will just explode on, and which they'll roll through. When there's a lot of enemies that stop a boulder, cast more Volcanoes. Your Volcano also occasionally won't spawn when you cast them too close to certain terrain edges, so learn that too. I'm also going to dock in another point, just because it does get tiring looking at all the fire effects all the time instead of the actual game, because sometimes it makes it difficult to know what the fuck is actually going on. I wouldn't even blame you for not wanting to play the class because of it, but for what it's worth, the Firestorm variant is less bad on this front, because Fissure is a pretty subtle effect, so maybe give that a try. There's nothing special going on, and it's a pretty easy caster to play, but with the dock point, I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. Total. The Firecaster Druid brought its way back from the depths of sucking to a respectable 38 out of 60 as a 6.33. Thank you, Senpai and team, for actually successfully letting me live out that old dream of the Fire Druid being playable. Because there was a good core here, Brevik and his team just never got the chance to tune it right. In fact, the 5 spells aren't really any different than they were in Lord of Destruction, just with shorter cooldowns and real damage, so Senpai didn't even need to redesign too much here. But for every disappointment you have when a hype game doesn't live up, or some release doesn't meet your expectations, remember that there are at least a few stories where thanks to a dedicated dev team, something was able to reach its full potential down the line. Later.